Good morning. You saw that I entitled this session, was it something we said or something we didn't say? Isn't it interesting that as publishers, we write words constantly. We're putting out information all the time, and yet I feel like there's a need to do a better job of communicating what it is that we do, why it's so important, and why we need to be appreciated more. And I don't want this to be a pity party about nobody respects us, because I don't think that's the truth. But we do spend a lot of time highlighting our authors, the great research that they do. We try to communicate our company's values and what we do internally with our own staff and externally with our stakeholders, but we could be doing more, because it doesn't seem to matter how much we talk about the value we add to scholarly research. There's a segment of our stakeholders that is where it doesn't get through. Doesn't matter how many interviews we do. It doesn't seem to matter whether we have visits to elected or non-elected offices. We've got brochures out there. We've got websites out there. But we're always asking ourselves, what is it? Why don't people understand that what we do has value to scholarly research? Tim Brooks talked yesterday about being trapped in our own language. Maybe that's part of it. Maybe the language that we're using to communicate what we do is our own internal language rather than what the audience needs to hear from us in language they understand. Maybe we're too busy talking to ourselves. We're not talking to the outside enough. Maybe we're not using everybody in our organization to do that. He talked about having all of the people in your audience, in your organization, trained to be able to talk about the issues that are in your own organization to the external world. Talk, I think was the way he put it. None of that's easy. It all takes time. It all takes an incredible amount of effort, and we're all already overloaded. So how do you do that? You have to take time out of your day. You have to find somebody in your organization that's responsible for that if you don't already have a communicator in your organization. It's all about putting the work in the front part of communicating, rather than running behind the issues and trying to get them explained away or explained in a way that others can understand. So as that background, we have two very seasoned professionals to talk about that. And we have some lessons to share with you. And we're hoping that in the end of this discussion that we'll have with you, that you'll be willing to share some of your own experiences and innovative ways that you've found to discuss your company and philosophies with your audiences. So we have Nature Publishing and Wiley here to talk about what they're doing in those particular areas. Grace Baynes is the head of publishing, head of communications for Nature Publishing Group. So I'd ask her to come up first, and then we'll have Helen Bray come from Wiley to discuss the same thing. So welcome.
Thank you, Linda. Good morning. Thank you for getting up nice, bright and early to join us for this session. Those of you who were at the ALPS conference, ALPSP conference a few years ago might remember my 7 lessons learnt in social media talk. And I'm back with some more lessons today, but with rather less of my own human failings this time, thankfully. Some of the lessons that I'd like to share with you will sound like common sense. They'll sound obvious. Good. Should mean they're easy for you to implement, or you're already doing them, or they're things that make immediate sense for you to do as an organization. So thinking about Linda's call for investment in communication, I thought it would be helpful for me to start by telling you how the communication setup works at Nature Publishing Group. We're a global business. We have about 1,700 employees worldwide. And the corporate communications function sits in the marketing team. And the marketing team is about 50 to 60 people globally. So quite a small organization, actually, for quite a big company. And the corporate communications function is a team of 4, including me. And go back 6 years to when I joined, and the corporate communications function was 1 person, me. So you can do this with a small, hard-working team. It's entirely possible. Macmillan Science and Education has also recently been investing in corporate communications, and we now have some very seasoned professionals working at Macmillan Science and Education level, which is fantastic for me because I can really draw on their expertise. But being a lean team also brings its benefits, and it's actually a really good challenge for a corporate communications person because you must rely on your colleagues. If you try and do it all on your own, you're never going to be able to do it. So I have to rely on my colleagues in marketing, publishing, editorial, customer service, sales, to help me spread the word. And then that gives me a responsibility to make sure that they know how to do that and they have the information they need to do that. So we work very much hand in hand with our marketing colleagues, and we're also fully embedded in the business, and that's one thing I'm really, really grateful for. So here are some of the things that I think we've learned at MPG over the last 6 years. I do want to say that we haven't nailed all of these. Lots of these lessons are things we know we need to do better, and they're a work in progress. But these are the things that I think are the 10 things that I think that we've learned over the last 6 years. So first, think about communication early, internally and externally. How are you going to communicate? Think about it at the start of a project, at the start of an external pressure on your business, not when you're in a crisis or about to launch. I don't forget, and it still happens occasionally now, when I first started, it used to happen a lot. The day before a product was due to launch, they'd been talking to the marketing team for months, all the collateral was ready, the campaigns were ready, and then they came to me the day before and they said, Grace, we're launching tomorrow, can we have a press release? Okay. What's worse is that once or twice, they launched and then they came to me and said, we launched yesterday, can we have a press release? That uses less than 5% of my value to our business. Yeah, I can write you a press release, I can do it fast, I can send it out, but actually communication is a lot more complex than just writing a press release and sending it out. And doing it well means that you think about your approach and you think about it early. That also has the advantage that you can think about potential objections to what you're doing, you can think about potential questions, and you can have the answers ready instead of being caught on the fly. And it means you can brief your colleagues. So your colleagues can be ready if they're standing at a conference booth and an author walks up to them and says, what's this thing you've just announced? And they're like, I don't know anything about it, which does happen. And it still happens in our business because I don't always get it perfectly right. So think about it early. Think about the hot topics, the sensitivities, what's going to be a red flag to your audience. And sometimes I've been lucky enough that those considerations about how our audience will react have actually influenced the policy itself. Not always, but sometimes how our audience will react is important enough that we actually change our approach because we are a customer-led business. Which leads to our second learning, which is you can't do that well if you don't invest in communication internally and externally. It has to be integrated. Communications people have to be on your project teams, maybe not for the entirety of the project, but remember they're there as a resource to help you. And as we can show, we're not necessarily a large team. You don't need a huge number of people to do this. Internal communications I mentioned just now, and that leads to my next lesson, and I think it's probably actually one of the most important lessons, which is make all of your employees your spokespeople. An editor talking to other researchers about developments in our policies, about a new journal that he or she is really excited about, or a technologist who's recognized in his or her field for being an expert in linked data, for example, is going to be far more interesting and far more compelling than anything I can say. So my job is to give them the information they need and to excite them enough about what we're doing that they then become our spokespeople, and basically I can just go and have a cup of tea and catch up on email. At NPG, all of our editorial staff are independent of the business, which means I can't tell them what to say, I can't tell them what not to say. I can't tell them whether to comment or not. They have freedom to comment on social media, provided they don't bring the company into disrepute and other sensible guidelines like that. That's incredibly useful from a communications perspective, because it means the people that matter most to our audience are out there talking, engaging, listening, having conversations. It can also be incredibly scary as a corporate communications person, but I've learnt to live with it, and I think on balance it's better. I'll give you a few examples of how powerful that can actually be. So earlier on this year, we announced a partnership with an open science publisher called Frontiers. And they're very, very strong in neuroscience. And one of our senior neuroscience editors, Noah Gray, was very excited about this partnership. He's a big open science advocate. And he really wanted to tweet it. So he contacted me and he said, when are you making it public? Because I really want to tweet it. So I said, wait until this time and then you can do it. And he did it, and it went all over Twitter in the science community. That's a relative thing. We weren't trending, and not Justin Bieber, but it did go all over Twitter. And there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tweets about this because of that one editor, because he's so influential and so well followed and so active on social media. So he had way more power to get the message out than anything I could have done. The other example is a subscription campaign that we ran last year, where you could get Nature, a year's personal subscription to Nature for the impact factor price. So it was £36, $36, or €36. And the Nature News team, who are incredibly active on social media, were really excited about this because they like more people reading their content. So they really got behind this, and it was entirely their decision, and they were tweeting about it from their Nature News and Comment Twitter account. We had as many sales from the Nature News Twitter account as we did from email marketing. We had over 200 sales from Nature News, the Nature News Twitter account. Done right, it can be incredibly powerful, but you can't fake it, and you have to live with the risks. That means empowerment, it means permission, it means guidelines, but it's really important that internal communications are incredibly strong so that people have the information they need to be able to communicate, to be able to answer questions, to feel that it's okay for them to comment. Fourth lesson, still actually thinking about Twitter. This is not all about social media, I promise. Power of external advocates. This is something in this room I think we probably all know very well. External advocates for us, against us, for a cause that perhaps is challenging for us. They can be incredibly powerful. When we announced our linked data platform, Tim Berners-Lee heard about it, and he tweeted a link to our linked data platform. And linked data platform press release, actually. Press releases still do work occasionally. And that was the most accessed press release of the year on something that is actually fairly niche and specialized because of Tim Berners-Lee. Now, you don't get Tim Berners-Lee tweeting your information very often, and I think I count myself lucky that it happened once in my life. But it can be incredibly powerful to have external advocates on your side. And actually, it's quite exciting for me when I'm engaging in conversations with open access advocates, of which I am one. I'm very passionate about open access myself. But sometimes when we're having conversations about what publishers should and shouldn't do, other people in the community will actually weigh in and say, no, you're being unfair there, you're being unreasonable, you need to think about this. If you can get people on your side, or at least understanding your perspective, then that can be incredibly powerful. And if you don't, then it can be dangerous. So how do you get advocates on your side? Lesson 5, you have to be part of the conversation. As well as broadcasting, we need to be listening, we need to be having dialogue. I just come back from a sailing holiday in Greece, and I was chatting to one of my fellow sailors on the trip, and she was talking about how she's an entrepreneur. She was talking about how she trains her salespeople, and she says, my salespeople do not sell. They go into an hour-long conversation, and the first 30 minutes, the client is talking, potential client is talking. and they listen. And they listen to the needs and the challenges that client is facing. And then in the second half of the conversation, they start to talk and they start to suggest some solutions, reflecting back to address the challenges that they've been hearing about. This is grandma suck-egg stuff, right? This is how every good salesperson works. But who's better at convincing people in our organization than anybody else? Salespeople. You don't convince people by shouting at them. You convince people by having a conversation and understanding where they're coming from. In the conversation about strategic communications, and there is a lot, I think we would agree around at the moment, it's become quite fashionable, which is quite nice for us communicators. I've been reading a lot and hearing a lot about thought leadership and advocates. So I was quite amused to read a recent piece by Alex Aspinall in B2B Marketing entitled How Not to Become a Thought Leader. And he says it very well, so I just want to read you a brief excerpt. If you're thinking about how you can become a thought leader, chances are you'll never get there. The genuinely leading thought leaders, gosh, that's hard to say, did not attain their status by Googling how to become a thought leader. They probably didn't really even set out to become thought leaders. Real thought leaders don't write things they think people want to read. They write new things, things that other people may not yet agree with or might not yet be able to see the value of. In most instances, it's probably enough to add meaningfully to the conversation occasionally and ensure your core proposition is coherent and relevant to the messages you're sending out. We can't all be shepherds. Which leads me neatly on to lesson 6. Know your audience. What they want, but also how they speak, what language they're using, tone of voice, all of those things. And I think, to be honest, as publishers, too often we do talk internal talk externally. And we perhaps need to listen a bit more and understand the language our customers are speaking. We also need to put ourselves in our customers' shoes, and we have to justify why we deserve to exist. We don't deserve to exist for our own sake. We exist to serve a need, and we need to explain that. And the only way we're going to do that is to put ourselves in our customers' shoes. This is an old communications lesson. Say it again, say it again. Be prepared to repeat yourself. Classic example are open access offerings at Nature Publishing Group. I've given a talk internally every year for the last 4 years, about our open access offerings, and I still get people asking me the most basic questions, time after time. You have to say it and say it and say it again until people are ready to take it on board, until they're ready and they need that bit of information or they need to understand that, and then they'll be ready to take it in. Lesson 8, keep those messages simple. Over the years, I've been involved in multiple efforts to come up with elevator pitches, short, snappy explanations of what publishers do and how we add value. And I can see a number of people around the room that I've worked with on those efforts over the years, and I think they would probably all agree with me that we haven't nailed it yet. It's still a work in progress, and it's a big challenge for us. I think it's one of the biggest challenges for us, actually. If I'm talking to a taxi driver, they're not going to sit and listen to a nuanced 5-minute argument about why what I do matters. You know, they're looking at traffic, and I need to get it across in 1 or 2 sentences, and I, in 6 years of trying, have not nailed that. So last time I wrote a set of FAQs for internal use for dealing with an upcoming situation, I wrote a tweet for each one. And I did that because I knew if we were going to have to answer questions, we were going to probably have to answer them on Twitter. And it's really, really hard to do that on the fly. Because you have to get your point across in less than 140 characters. And it has to be less than 140 characters because you're replying to someone. So you need @ and their username and then the characters that you're going to use. But it was a really good exercise. And actually, it was much better doing that in the calm of preparation than trying to do it in real time when, you know, I've got somebody shouting at me on the internet. Which leads me on to lesson 9. Which is know when to respond and know when to leave it alone. I decided to do this talk without slides as a challenge to myself. And I was tempted to break that rule by putting that up the seminal "There's something, I can't come to bed, there's something wrong on the internet" cartoon. But I'm sure you've all seen it. it's easy to fall into that trap, and I've done it many times. I tie myself up in knots trying to figure out how to respond to somebody, or getting angry with somebody who just doesn't get it, or going back and forth with someone. And you can spend a lot of time and a lot of emotional energy doing that. Sometimes you should respond, and sometimes you just need to leave it alone. And for those who follow the open access debates, you may have seen me pop up fairly regularly in the comment thread on Jonathan Ison's blog, Phylogenomics. And there's 3 reasons why I choose to engage with him there. One is specifically, in this case, he was calling us out quite rightly on a mistake we'd made, an error we'd made. And I think as publishers, we probably need to be a bit more open when we do make mistakes, because we all do, we're human beings. And there are 2 further reasons. One, he's deeply reasonable, and I can actually have a conversation with him, so it's worthwhile. And the second is that I have a great deal of respect for his influence, and he can be a powerful advocate for us as publishers, or he can be a powerful advocate against us, and it's up to us. So I ignore him at my peril. And actually, I found interacting with him has been very affirming, because he is deeply reasonable. So last lesson, and kind of leads on from that one, which is please be human, and don't be afraid to admit your mistakes. That I'll hand over to Helen to tell us about some examples of actually putting those lessons into practice.
Thanks, Grace. So I think the theme of yesterday was all about change, and Grace has just pointed out for us that the principles of good communication really don't change. In fact, communication can be one of the ways in which we can help to manage in a really extreme time of change. So as Grace said, what I want to talk a bit about today is the way in which Wiley is starting a process to really bring change from the outside into the business, and how communication is helping with that. So I'm going to start with my favorite quote about change, which is this one. So if the rate of change on the outside exceeds the rate of change on the inside, the end is near. Suitably doom and gloom. Obviously written for a commercial organisation, but I think it applies to any organisation. And I also think it probably applies to publishing as a whole. So what I want to talk about today is how we're trying to bring those rates of change to be something similar. So if the change outside is very fast, how are we speeding up our change process internally? And how can we use communication to do that? Now, this cartoon is not quite what I have in mind when I talk about equalizing rates of change. I think external change can be a catalyst for internal change. The more that we understand what's happening externally, the more that we can become adaptable, we can increase our own capabilities to change. So the process that we're undertaking at Wiley is really this one, and this is how we're using communication. It's not the only way we're adapting to change, of course it's not, but this talk is about communication and its role in helping that adaptation. So we began with some really outside thinking, so thinking outside of our organisation, thinking outside of our industry. What is the change that's taking place? Let's get a broad approach to that. Let's understand what's happening. We backed that up with some research amongst all of our stakeholders to understand their views on change, to understand what our audiences and what our stakeholders and partners think are important. And now we've begun to facilitate a broad discussion about the future, about that change. And of course, what we're doing is testing what's working, we're measuring it, we're learning as we go along, because we really need to adapt in order to thrive. But let's put a little bit of colour behind that process, and let's talk about some of the things that we have done. So we set off with a very broad review of what's happening in global research generally. What does the future look like? The global research endeavour. And there's lots of trends that we discovered, lots of future trends, and none of these will be a surprise to anybody, I'm sure. Lots of dispersed innovation, entrepreneurial business, cooperative technology development. It really is an exciting time. I'm sure everybody feels that. And it's not just within publishing, it's so much broader. The generational trends, the behavioural trends, the trends in society, as well as the research trends. It really is an exciting time. So this is where we started. And then we thought, but now we need to narrow this down. It's the, what does this really mean for us? And how can we narrow it down to understand our stakeholders' views on this? And so we did some research. And we asked all of our stakeholders, this was about 1,500 researchers, librarians, society partners, and we asked them which trends are of the most interest to them. And here's the kind of top 5. These were clustered together as a top 5. And it's interesting when you look at some of these, we've got greater collaboration tools, new approaches to funding, automated digital tools to evaluate the strength of academic work. It's interesting to look at some of these trends and map them against the kind of presentations that we had yesterday for the ALPS innovation finalists, that there's some real similarities between the work that is being recognized there and some of the future trends which we found in the research that we carried out. But I thought I would put some numbers behind this for you so you could see really exactly what people were interested in. And this question asked people, what do you think, which future trend do you think has the most potential to revolutionize academic research? And so here you can see people could give up to 3 answers, and here you just have the top 5 trends. So this is telling you that 55% of people said that digital tools to enable more researcher collaboration was one of the top 3 trends that's going to revolutionize academic research. And you can see the list, and it runs down and say these are just the top 5. There were lots more information, a very, very rich information source that we have. I thought this audience particularly would be interested to see what our society partners said, and you can see that it pretty much matches the total that we have there. Not very different, but some of the perspectives of academics and librarians are slightly different, that librarians are very concerned about researcher collaboration and also about automated tools to evaluate the strength of work. So slightly different perspectives there, but interesting to have looked at a vast array of data in order to sort these out. But coming back now to those specific audiences and those stakeholder needs, because what we're trying to do is understand how all this massive change, and I'm sure we're all in the same boat, how all this massive change is going to affect us all, and really narrowing down how do we interpret this? And that really is a conversation that we want to have. It's a conversation that we know is much better had. We don't have the answers. We need to have the kind of conversation with everybody who's involved in it, because we want to build our collective experience and really understand and interpret the change. So if we need to switch over to Bluetooth paperclips, let's discover that together. Let's not go down a blind alley. So we said to ourselves, well, we're really keen to have this conversation. We know that it's important to us. We believe it's important to our stakeholders. But we thought we'd better check whether actually it is important to our stakeholders. How important is it? So we went back to some research that we'd done previously, where we talked to, again, the same groups, to academics, to researchers, to society partners, and we talked to those groups about what they really want from a publisher, about what they think drives a publisher's success. Is it about being innovative, forward-looking, and having the right kind of mindset to look forward and adapt to change? And the answer quite clearly came back to us, actually, no, it's not all about that. And really, we must be really careful not to let the baby out with the bathwater. Each one of these yellow flashes here talks about title quality. It talks about academic reputation. It talks about being highly regarded by the academic community. Really, as a publisher, that's what our audiences want from us. And it's a salutary lesson to me as a communicator to remember that absolutely front and central, quality, quality, quality publishing is what all our audiences and what all our stakeholders want from us. However, that said, when we look more carefully at some of the audiences, are they also interested in change? Are they also interested in the future and adapting and having that kind of discussion with us? Well, yes, they are. Because this question asked people, what is the most important thing that you want from a publisher? What is going to drive their success? And 8% of our society partners would say that the most important thing would be about understanding their needs, their current and future needs. And 7% would say that it is about having an innovative mindset. So that's the most important thing. So clearly, there is an appetite for some of this conversation, some of this discussion about the future. And from a Wiley point of view, from inside our organization, just as Grace said, it's really so important to make sure that all of our colleagues internally are really focused on these same things. We're also very, very keen to have this conversation, to really understand what's happening. Nearly a quarter of us think that absolutely customer needs are what drives the success of us as a publisher. So yes, we want to have this conversation. Yes, we're up for it. But actually, how should we do that? And so we again asked our stakeholders, how are we going to have this conversation? And they came back to us, more than 1,000 of them, to tell us, for 70% of them, they really like email. Right now, we really like email. The social media is important, but actually, there's a huge proportion of our audiences that are very happy corresponding by email. There's a very nice 13% of folk up there who are quite happy to come and find the information that we put out. But there's another 13% for whom we must work a lot harder. And that means events, it means social media, it means engaging on academic websites and forums. So what we've begun to do is a multi-channel strategy that starts to have this conversation. And it's a simple set of things, but it is bound together by the research and the knowledge that we are doing things which are consistent and coherent and starting to have this conversation. So we have now a Wiley Exchanges blog, and it's all about discussion, ideas for the future. It's aimed at societies, researchers, and librarians, posting twice or usually 3 times a week. We have a social media program, which we've enhanced clearly. We've run a number of events already about forward-facing topics. This is all about the future. This is not about Wiley Publishing. This is about let's have a conversation about the future, the kind of conversations that we've been having as a group yesterday, and I'm sure we'll continue over the next couple of days. And you can see from the pictures, the vast array of my rogues gallery, that we're not just using internal colleagues to speak, we're also inviting lots of external guest bloggers to really broaden out that conversation and make sure it's of interest to everybody. We began at the start of the summer, and we began with a fairly soft start, but we're gathering momentum now. We had 7,000 unique visitors in August, so we're pleased with the momentum. And really what we're doing is very much about measuring how we're doing. It's very much about putting some metrics in there, testing new formats, really learning how to do this better, how to have this conversation, and really facilitate a discussion that's much broader than us. But the most important thing that we're doing, we're commenting, we're discussing, but we're listening. Comes back to Grace's point earlier. What we want to do is really listen and understand and grow our collective understanding of what's important as we change in the future. I think that communication and dialogue has a real place to play in changing perceptions, but it can also change behavior, and that's why we want to be part of the conversation and not sat outside of it. If you want to join the conversation, here's the details. I'm not going to dwell on those. But as Linda said earlier, what we'd really like to do is to start a conversation with you now. So yes, by all means, please do ask us any questions that you have, but also, I've put a last question up here that we're really interested in understanding how your organization is using communication to adapt to change, and then maybe we can swap notes, we can share, we can learn together. Thank you very much.
So we left a lot of time here in the end at our peril, first thing in the morning. You haven't had enough coffee yet, so maybe this was a horrible idea. Maybe it's the opportunity to start thinking about how we use each other and the rest of our staff to help our stakeholders get through this real upheaval in our own businesses. Maybe we need to talk about how we best communicate internally to our staff in order to give them the tools they need to talk about our business to the outside world. How do we respond to the negativity of open access in a way that we are having a hard time dealing with? So we're open to your ideas. We're open to questions. Does anybody have any questions of the three of us now that we could answer? I have one. How does the press help us? There's the idea of mediated conversations with the press. So I just talked to that reporter, but the reporter didn't get it right, versus having the conversations with our own stakeholders through blogs. Is there a way to do it so that the press is on our side, or do we give up on it because they come in with their own viewpoint? What's the right mix?
I mean, my view is that the press is often a fantastic catalyst for starting discussion, so that whether or not it accurately conveys all the messages we wanted to give, actually it's such a good starting point. So that discussion then can carry on in blogs, it can carry on in forums and social media, but very often I think the press is seen as an authoritative source, and it's a way of starting the discussion. So I think very much we certainly don't ignore the press, we certainly continue to work with them, we certainly use them cooperatively and try to increase everyone's understanding, is my view.
I would add to that and agree with it, that I think that it does give an opportunity to get an issue to a wide audience in an accessible way, or to synthesize different developments and different streams of thought together. I think the challenge for us, and it goes back to keep your messages simple, is quite often when we're talking to journalists, the stuff that we're explaining is incredibly complicated, and we use 15, 20 sentences, and then we're surprised when the journalist picks the one sentence out of that 15, 20 sentences which suits the angle they've decided to take on that story. So I think it is sometimes we just need to be more disciplined about going in and saying, I'm going to communicate one message, and I'm going to stick to that one message because that's what I want this journalist to write about in this story. But it's not easy to do. I'm as guilty of it as everybody else.
So is there someone with a microphone?
Hi, David Smith from the IET. I'm curious, I've got a question, I think, for Nature. So you have journalists who obviously write some excellent articles about what's happening externally. Are you using them to write articles internally for the organisation?
That's a very good question. No, we're not. I mentioned the editorial independence of our editors. That applies to our journalistic staff as well, which means that I have to pitch and brief journalists, my colleagues who sit in the next room to me, in the same way that Helen would. And actually, if anything, I have to work harder to convince them, because they want to make sure that they're not seen as being biased. But we don't use them to write things internally, and that's a really interesting idea. I think we should add that to the list of ideas to take away.
My name is David Thomas with Thomson Reuters. Question I have is, I understand that Twitter is a very powerful communication device, but I don't know that you have to monitor it to make sure that you respond in a timely fashion to certain things you decide to respond to. But in an average week, what is that time component to monitor Twitter, respond, and get caught up in things? Is it a time sink, or is it time well used?
It is a time commitment, I would say. It depends how it depends how embedded you are and how much you want to do. So I know some organisations have a dedicated person where they spend most of their time monitoring, analysing, looking at their organisation's presence. We don't do that. And when we, I would say, in terms of my time, I spend less than an hour a day, and there are other people in our organisation that are spending, but it's at least an hour a day to do it properly. So it is a time commitment, but I think it's time well worth spent, because you learn a lot as well as doing your reputation management. Interesting articles, interesting things to think about that I would not have heard about in other ways.
Hi, Charlie Rappel, TBI Communications. Thank you for a really interesting start to the day. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about brand, which is sort of, for me anyway, kind of at the heart of a lot of communications, and we haven't talked about it too much yet today. And particularly it came into my mind when you talked about trying to boil things down to one key message that you're trying to convey when you talk to people externally. What kind of work have you guys done in Nature and in Wiley with your staff to boil down what it is that your brand means, what you stand for, and to what extent have you done that, and how have you done that?
Yeah, so some some of the research that I was sharing with you was done as part of a much larger brand project. So it was very much about boiling down, understanding the very essence of it, which I think is also partly where I was coming from when I was talking about the kind of quality element, that absolutely I think it would be part of everybody's kind of brand essence, brand values. So yes, we have done a fair bit of that work, and we have also begun the communication of that and the discussion of that with our employees and colleagues. It wasn't an external program. It was very much done in conjunction with all of our colleagues too, so that the brand essence came not from the communications team, but from what we said about ourselves as a whole group of colleagues. So yes, we have done that work, and really that drives a lot of the way that we think about how we engage and how we have this conversation.
Again, it's a very good question, and I don't think as an organisation, as Nature Publishing Group, we've necessarily done that exercise, certainly not in my time, although it may well have been done before my time. And in some ways, we almost don't need to internally for Nature Publishing Group, because we stand for quality, we stand for integrity, we stand for being partners to the scientific community and being committed to communicating science and helping researchers communicate science. And that's the 1869 vision of Nature, and that's what we live and breathe by. But what we have been doing a lot of recently is looking at our employer brand internally, so looking at what makes people proud to work there, what they believe we stand for. And it would be interesting to think about then taking that externally and seeing how that matches to how we're perceived by our customers.
I'm Graham Taylor. I'm a freelance trade association. I like the idea of writing the tweet in advance, but I love it, in fact. But I think it's also probably the hardest thing to do. I was at an event about 18 months ago when somebody who may be in this room behind me said, we're an industry that can write you a really mean 5-page position paper. We're bloody good at that. We're really terrible at encapsulating what we do in a tweet. And I've watched various sections of this industry in various markets struggle and twist and turn to try and do that for about 40 years, actually. And we failed. I think we've failed. And I don't know if there is a magic bullet, a phrase that allows us to be loved, which is what we want, for people to need us. I wish there was, but it's a challenge to us all. And if somebody can come up with that by the end of this conference, it'll be the best one I've ever been to.
I think what we need to always consider is that this is a topic, Graham, that doesn't go away. It is something we need to talk about every time we get together. This is the struggle we will always have, is how do we best do that? And I don't think it will, I think that idea changes as we go through time, so that it's not a static message either. So it should constantly be reworked as our audience changes, as the technology changes. We didn't have tweets back when I started in this industry. We didn't have the web, for God's sakes, when I started in this industry. All we had were pieces of paper. So our tools for communicating what we do have changed, and learning to use those tools better, using all of our skills that we have and all the people that we have, is part of it. And what we're urging is that you consider that and use more than just the marketing staff to do that. It should be every customer service person who answers the phone about a subscription that went wrong. They have to be prepared with the question on open access. As one.
Where you've got the marketing staff and somebody might have the time to sit and look at Twitter and all that, is fine. When you've got a really small organisation, when one person's wearing 10 hats, are there any tools that can be employed to monitor what's been said about your publications and to help you start the conversation more efficiently?
There are lots. Actually, we've kind of reached the limit of what we can do with human power. So it's something that we're actively looking into at the moment. At the moment, I'm using Hootsuite, and you can set up searches on search terms. You can follow hashtags, and so you can see at a glance. You can take 5 minutes and go and have a look and see if there's anything that you do need to be aware of or do need to respond to. But there are other tools. And there are a number of them that will take a more overall view of what's being said on Facebook, on Twitter. I don't feel ready to recommend a particular one at this point, but certainly there are lots of tools out there.
At lots of different prices.
Yes. But
Hootsuite is very good.
Yeah, but there are free tools. There are free tools like Hootsuite out there, which are a good starting point.
Back in the back.
Mark Carden from Mosaic Recruitment. Following on that kind of measurement theme, at a strategic level, I mean, talking about brand and that kind of thing, what do you do to measure kind of year on year where you're taking your communications and your brand and moving that forward? Is that something you measure? Is that something that's measurable? Is it worth it? Is it too expensive to measure whether you're kind of moving the corporation forward in communication terms?
So yes, from a Wiley point of view, we are measuring it. So we've done a couple now, and we plan to continue to measure what we call our brand health measures. So we're not just measuring the metrics of what we're doing in terms of communication. We're also, as you say, measuring, are we moving the needle, and are we matching our brand values that we've set out for ourselves. So yes, is the answer. We are.
At a reputational level, I would say we're currently not, although it's something I'm very conscious that we need to be doing. And if we're talking about investing in communications, you also need to be demonstrating the return on that investment, which can be very challenging, I think, with communications activities, because often it's you can't point to 1,000 sales, or you can look at web traffic, you can look at other measures of interest, you can look at overall the positivity and negativity of what people are saying about you. But I think benchmarking it with brand health is an excellent idea, and it's something we should all be thinking about where we can. Even in small ways, I think, you don't have to have a huge program to do it. You can have several questions that you go back to year after year.
I must admit, I'm really interested in what other organisations are doing, and I don't know if we have anybody else that would want to explain what they're doing, because we've given you a couple of examples. Clearly, Grace has got the principles, and it is so. I'm really interested.
This is Eric Markel-Sabota from Springer. Pretty much the same. We're using Hootsuite for social media. We are measuring social media because the tools are there. In terms of the question that was just asked before, how do you measure the effect that corporate communications departments have on the benefit of or the progress of the company? My boss, who tends to keep things simple, he says, communications, we know it's important. We don't know how important it is. And to have a better guess, which would still be a guess, costs an awful lot of money. So I'd rather use the money that, if you look at, you issue a press release, what effect has that had? There are many agencies that will sell you algorithms so you can calculate, what the worth of coverage is. Yeah. We honestly don't believe in it, and I used to work for one of the agencies that used to sell these types of algorithms to clients, and my opinion then was a bit different. For the amount of money you can hire a very intelligent junior communications person, that's what it will cost you to hire an agency to evaluate it for you. And I think at the end of the day, in many communications things, common sense and keeping it simple are already, that's going to get you a lot further than expensive algorithms or calculations. I think one comment I wanted to make earlier is I find it fascinating after 10 years in publishing that we are awfully good, especially some of the larger or some of the very prestigious publishers, to communicate simply so that lay people and politicians can understand the science that we publish. But we have not been successful in explaining how publishing works to the same extent. And either we are boring everyone to tears with detail, because we all know we're very intelligent and it's all very complicated, and of course, you know, you couldn't possibly understand because you're not a publisher, which I heard for the first 2 years of my career because I came in laterally. You know, you couldn't possibly understand this. You're not a publisher. Well, it's really not that complicated, and I think one of the elements is we have maybe been okay in explaining what publishing is, but not the financials, the pricing, the profits. And I don't think there's anything to hide, but we just haven't, we're not comfortable discussing that. Societies aren't comfortable discussing that they're what are they called? Not profits, but surpluses. What is done with them, and we have not been successful. And there's more time, I think, spent internally of the commercial against the not-for-profit. And it's almost the same as open access is good and subscription is bad, which is also nonsense. There is no open access movement. Don't be fooled by anyone. It doesn't exist. It's a business model. So I think there's still a lot of work to do. But I think it's about simplicity, not navel-gazing. So we need to find hard messages that we might not be comfortable actually saying, or in the past. We need to be blunt, and we need to be blunt more often. Grace is very right. Repeat, repeat, repeat. So.
And we need to work together. It's not a singular message. We can work these messages together so that we're echoing each other rather than conflicting with each other about the messages. That's not an antitrust issue, messaging. Pricing is, but not messaging. So this conversation can't stop today. It has to continue, and I urge all of us to do so. I think we have time for one more question before we have to wrap this up. Does anybody have one more? Ian.
So Linda, just picking up on that point, I often read about the publishing lobby and the power of this publishing lobby that is out there. It's often quoted by people that would quite like to see the scholarly publishing industry decline to nothing. And I've worked for a trade association, and I know that there isn't really a publishing lobby. Google have, I think, 9 or 10 full-time lobbyists in Brussels and Luxembourg, and the publishing industry has none. So coming back to what you were saying, Linda, how do we, as publishing organisations working with and through our trade associations, how do we get a common message which is easily articulated, which is that kind of elevator pitch? And is it even possible, or are we such diverse businesses that we just can't do that?
Yes, there's diversity in what we publish, but publishing isn't diverse. Peer review isn't diverse. We do have, as an aside, there are several people. I know STM has someone who's in Brussels frequently, and I know that AAP has put money together with STM and has hired a full-time lobbyist that's on the U.S. side. But that's one person. We have people who spend part-time doing it, or an hour or two a week. Is it enough? No. We should do better at that. They work very hard on messaging. It's still a matter of working harder at it and talking more. The only message I can give you is it just takes more, not less. We're not putting enough effort into it, as much effort as we're putting into it. You guys have anything to add?
I'm not sure we are ever going to agree on the same message that we should all be saying. I think we've given that a pretty good go. I think I would suggest that I set you all homework, which is go away and think about how you would explain what publishers do and why it matters to your mother or a taxi driver. And then I think we should pool all of that, and out of that will probably come some brilliant ways to explain what we do. But I think if we try and word shop it together, we'll still be here in 10 years' time talking about how we need this.
But also what we need to say will have changed.
Yes.
I mean, I do think that we're in such a time of change.
I agree with that, yeah.
Actually, what we do, we have a chance to do things differently, to say things differently, to communicate about it differently.
This has been interesting to us. Hopefully it's been interesting to you. I want this to continue, and I want us to just keep talking about it. That homework is important that Grace talks about. So let's keep it up. And thank you for your attention this morning. I think we're between you and the coffee break, right?